Hello and welcome to Dialogue. The digital economy has been called the third great economic revolution after the agricultural and industrial revolutions, and believed to be a stabilizer amid the devastating global pandemic. A white paper released by China Academy of Information and Communications Technology shows that China's digital economy increased by 9.6% to $5.4 trillion last year, second only to the U.S., which hit $13.6 trillion. So what is driving this digital economy, and what does this growth say about China's economic policy? And what opportunities and challenges can we expect from this young but exploding industry? To answer these questions and more, I'm joined by Wang Dan, the chief economist of Hang Seng Bank, and Rebecca Christie, a non-resident fellow of Bruegel, and Hong Hao, the chief strategist of Bank of Communications International. That's our topic. I'm Xu Jinduo. Welcome to the show. Rebecca, I will start with you. Because we are talking about the digital economy, can you introduce the concept to our viewers? What is digital economy?
The digital economy broadly refers to any number of sectors and ways of living that happen primarily in virtual spaces and not in face-to-face interaction. As digital becomes a broader and broader concept, it gets harder to pin down. Some of it is the very large technology companies, some of it is buying something online and not in a store, and some of it is using computers to move your money around instead of exchanging pieces of paper.
Mm-hmm. Well, Wang Dan, if you look at the report released by China Academy of Information and Communications Technology, tell us, what are the highlights? What's your takeaway?
This white paper is giving an outline of the current status of digital economy, not just in China, but also with a cross-country comparison. So the paper pointed out that the digital economy has been an important pillar for the post-pandemic economic recovery. And also in China, it has been quite important to see that there are some transformational changes in the industrial supply chains and also in consumer behavior. And in the future, the digital economy is supposedly to become a lot larger and way more important than what we're seeing now, because it is not just artificial intelligence, it's not just industrial robots, but also anything related to data. So we're looking at only a start of this new economy.
Okay, we'll touch upon this topic, in particular the Chinese digital economy, later on. But before that, Hong Hao, if you look at this comparison, for example, in the year 2020, the U.S. digital economy, continued to lead the world with $13.6 trillion, and then it was followed by China with 5.4, Germany, Japan, both at about $2.5 trillion, and UK at $1.8 trillion. How do you compare these digital economies? U.S., UK, Germany, Japan, China. What are the commonalities, like a commonality among these economies, or how different are they in terms of their policy, in terms of the strategy?
Yeah, well, I think all countries have realized that the digital economy is set to grow much further from here at an accelerated speed. And already, since the pandemic last year, we've seen increasing usage and application of all sorts of computer software and digital technology into people's daily life. So I wouldn't be surprised to see, as the pandemic is still lingering, more and more people in more and more countries realize the importance of having a comprehensive digital strategy going forward. As for China, the digital economy is already more than 40% of GDP. I think in the US, it is higher indeed, but I think it's a reflection of the U.S. started earlier. The U.S. started 40 years ago. So I think the digital economy in China is still very young and has a lot more scope to grow.
Mm-hmm. Well, back to you, Wang Dan, you mentioned about the new features of Chinese digital economy, including the behavior of the consumers, its central supply chain. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, when we look at China's economic transition, there are some interesting features now. Because in economics, we always talk about the story about a fox and hedgehog. Because a fox needs to know a lot of things to survive, but for hedgehog, it only needs to know one thing to survive. And for many of the companies in Chinese digital world, it actually only needs to know this one thing: how to scale up and drive down cost and take advantage of China's vast consumer demand. So when you compare that with the Western world, it's quite different, because in the US and particularly in Europe, companies in digital world have to invest heavily in research and development, and they have to provide much higher value-added services so that the profit margin is also quite high. But for China, as long as we're still at this stage that middle class is expanding rapidly and the consumer wealth is surging, then many of those digital companies will actually have a pretty comfortable time. That's why we see a company like Pinduoduo can actually thrive in China. It doesn't have a complicated technology or strategy. It's just only taking advantage of this vast market. So in the future, maybe 20 years from now, we'll see a more similar model in the US and in China. But right now, we're still eating this premium of the Chinese consumer market.
Mm-hmm. Well, Rebecca, sitting in Europe looking at the China digital economy afar, so what do you see are the, as the contributing factors to the China's rapid growth of digital economy? For example, 2020 over 2019 is a growth of 9.6%.
China is really doing a lot with its domestic market to improve use of digital services, make them more available to a wider segment of the population, and use them to boost growth and help people do what they need to do more generally. The challenge will be how that interacts with the international economy. Globally, cross-border transactions come with different sets of concerns than domestic transactions, particularly for countries that have different standards on privacy, on intellectual property, and on the way they interact with the international financial system.
Mm-hmm. Well, if you look at this last year and this year, these 2 years, if there's anything different from the regular years, obviously it's the pandemic. Somehow the pandemic helped people realize, digital economy is resilient, can somehow help us overcome the disruptions created by the COVID-19. How the pandemic somehow influenced this or affected, or even facilitated the development of digital economy worldwide?
Yeah, well, I think the pandemic increased the isolation of people. It actually stopped a lot of social activities in the society. So I think as a result, as most people are locked down at home, got nowhere to go, they turn to, the digital economy, the internet, because you just got no choice, no other choice. So I think as a result, if you look at the number of users, the revenue growth of many of the internet platforms in China, I think in the past 2 years, it has been exponential. And I think it is also a accidentally set up an environment, for companies such as Pinduoduo to grow, even though they're still not making money just yet. So I think going forward, as people getting more used to this kind of digital life, for example, now we're doing this interview online instead of doing it in the studio. I think more and more people will get used to it. Then the digital economy will become truly part of people's daily life rather than a novelty of people's life.
Mm-hmm. Well, along with the development of the digital economy, Rebecca, obviously, there are discussions about whether digital economy somehow has leveled this play field, for example, because the threshold is low. Everybody can simply, access the digital economy, digital technology to do business or to sell anything or exchange with others. At the same time, it is we can see this big tech somehow is becoming a problem both in China and in the United States. Small correction, you are in Washington. So what do you see that kind of discussion, whether digital technology somehow created more inequality or somehow, bring people together?
Both is the real answer. We have not solved the problem of access for everyone. We have not made digital services equally available to people up and down the economy. You have to have a computer or a mobile device. You have to be able to get online, and you have to have the literacy to know, first of all, what you're trying to do, and second of all, how to do it with the technology you have. Depending on how your technology changes, either from border to border or because of different setups in different places, even if you know what you're trying to do, it's not always obvious which technology you need to have to know how to do it. So that's the first problem, is making this technology easier to use and safer for a larger number of people. Inequality at the other level, at the corporate level, as you've been saying, is also a concern. The U.S. has done a very good job of financing its technology companies in their early days and allowing them to scale up and get growth. And we now see that the market is dominated by some of these platform companies. Going forward, the challenge for all of the world's bigger economies is going to be how to nourish startups, how to nourish new technology, and make sure that the people coming along behind aren't left out in the cold.
Mm-hmm. Well, Wang Dan, if you look at this, inclusiveness or inequality brought about by digital technology, in China, the situation, my own personal impression is it's kind of like a quite inclusive. For example, you have a Taobao village in China. Basically, for a village, they have some special products. They can go to Taobao and marketing their products. So this is completely different. Give them much more access to market than before.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you look at Chinese villages, the benefits brought about by the digital economy is very evident. And in one of our bank's project, actually, we're helping this village in Yunnan Mojiang, actually Guineng village, to sell their purple rice. Previously, it's really hard to connect the farmers with the market and final consumers, but now it's just one click away. And on top of that, if you look at those small producers in inland China, especially in Western China, they have gained more freedom in marketing on their goods online. Previously, most of those small producers have to rely on larger suppliers in order to access to consumers. But now, given the right strategy and the right product, they could just do online streaming on their own. So I think overall, the benefits brought on by the digital economy would outweigh the inequality has created, because those inequalities are mostly concentrated in the sense that on the large platforms, they monopolize talents, they monopolize capital, so they can scale up and in a way crush many of their smaller competitors. But at the same time, they would also help and incubate a lot of those small producers. And I do think that platform is the future. It is just that in terms of antitrust, Chinese regulations probably need to catch up faster with the global standard.
Mm-hmm. Well, Hong Hao, of course, what we are talking about, comparing the countries like China, US, Japan, Germany, UK, all those, they are rather developed in digital technology. If you look at the developing world, this is a very large population over there. For example, in Africa, the infrastructure is still needed. And of course, you need to have a mobile phone. You needed to be able to log on the website, and so you can market and sell your products or your services over there. What do we need to do to narrow this gap between, say, developing world and the developed world in terms of digital economy?
Well, I think if you look at China as an example, even though it's a one big country, there are many tiers within this, big country. Some parts of China, for example, coastal China, more resemble of the developed world, while the inland China is more sort of in terms of development stage is more similar to a developing world. But you can see if you use China as an example, you can see how the digital economy, as Dan Wang mentioned just now, completely transformed rural China. All right, so now farmers can actually find buyers for their produce very easily. I think the same can be said for the emerging part of the world, the developing part of the world. I think that the hardest part for them really is how to get capital to invest in the digital infrastructure in those countries. and also have some sort of a coordination between different parts, so that they can build up a digital network, a platform economy relatively rapidly, and then find demand for their produce. So there are not much to be done, to be sure, because the developed world has been doing this for decades. Now, the emerging world is trying to catch up.
Mm-hmm. Well, hopefully, the gap between the developed and the developing world will be narrower and narrower. Of course, along with the rapid development of digital technology, the use of the technology, Rebecca, there comes another question, that is security or cyber security. We know, like in the U.S., you have this ransomware attack of big companies, corporate data loss. And of course, there's a personal concern too about the loss of personal information over there. How big an issue is that, both nationally and internationally?
Cybersecurity is a huge issue, and like all of these cross-cutting issues, happens at multiple levels. People who do things online need to worry about basic fraud, like having a friend or a family member steal their information. They need to worry about corporate fraud, having a company that is not what it seems to be, present a transaction that does not go through and run away with their money. They need to worry about independent crime, where someone who works perhaps outside of any structure or national arena comes and with a ransomware attack or something like that really tries to come after your assets or your property or your way of life. And then there are state actors, and that's also a concern. If a big government is coming to look at your data, they're probably going to get it, and that's something that we have to grapple with and decide how we're going to collectively manage as a global community.
Mm-hmm. Well, then, of course, in terms of security, when it comes to nation, there needs some regulation for every nation, like to behave in a certain way. But when it comes to the personal protection, protection of your own information data, somehow it appears to be like there's a need for literacy education. Everybody needs to be enhanced in terms of their knowledge how to protect yourself when you go online. Not only in China, I believe in every country there's such kind of awareness, let's say.
Yeah, it's getting to be tricky because I have heard there are companies now being created to help people to delete their historical data online or their tracks. And right now, I sometimes worry about my devices getting too smart. Because right now, if I look at what I have at home, I have this smart door that can figure out the fingerprints and facial recognition. And then there's a smart coffee maker, the smart air conditioner that I can remote control. Even for my dog, there's this smart food feeder. And also recently I bought this smart water feeding device. So all in all, I don't think the companies really have a very high consciousness in educating the final consumers that they should set the right password. And there should be some kind of incentive. It could be from the public, from the consumers, or from the government for companies to do that. And also to raise consumer awareness is quite important. Because especially in China, I don't think people are generally paying too much attention to this kind of password or smart devices they use. But eventually, I think people would pay if they ignore this for too long.
Mm-hmm. Well, Honghao, obviously, being smart is good, right? Being convenient, obviously, is welcomed. But if it's getting too smart, as Wang Dan says, people kind of like freaked out by the smartness, and also the potential, the fragility of our reliance on this digital technology. So probably that's why also, China is to introduce this data security law, which will come into effect actually in September.
Yeah, I would say so. I think, the amount of information that is available online, will enable any ill-intended criminals to draw a very comprehensive outline of any people who stay on the internet. So it's quite dangerous. So at this stage, only the government has the authority and the power, to protect the internet users. So it is necessary to introduce some sort of a data security law in place, to protect, at least the safety and privacy of people. As in terms of smart, many home appliances, as Wang Dan said just now, it's getting smarter, but I still don't want my fridge to order drinks for me.
Mm-hmm. Well, Rebecca, obviously in China, there's a data security law, and in the European Union, obviously, they are also in the leading position to introduce legislation or measures to protect the data, security of data. What about the U.S.? What is the sense, for people, or the nation, the governments, like what do we need to do to protect our data?
The U.S. has a lot of laws and regulations on the books, and of course, many crimes are already illegal, no matter how they happen, whether online or not. The challenge will be implementation, enforcement, and looking for ways to put these principles into practice so that people can feel safe and also so they can have reasonable expectations of being able to go about their lives without thinking about this constantly.
Mm-hmm. Closely related to digital economy is the introduction of digital currency, in particular those currency introduced by the central bank. So Hong Hao, back to you here. China created the digital RMB, official currency of China, by the central bank, People's Bank. Tell us, what is the primary consideration behind the move?
Well, I think, the digital payment system has been in place for some time. It offers great convenience and also, very quick analysis on, how and where the transactions are done. And I think, from a central bank's perspective, having a digital RMB, which is a higher power form of currency, it creates a lot of power for the central bank, to regulate the market. For example, it would be very difficult to do money laundering in the future, when the digital currency is in place. And also, as for banks' lending practice, it would be a lot harder to lend to use a different disguise to lend money to people who are not suitable or who are not creditworthy to get the loan. So you can do a lot of things like that, and also in terms of cross-border financing. Right. So once you have the digital currency, when you have goods exchange between two countries, you don't actually use the US dollar as an intermediary anymore. Right. So you can just use the digital form to settle the payment. So I think it offers great convenience. It's a technology breakthrough, and I think we've got to a point where the technology is mature enough, to implement such currency. So I think, since late last year, the central bank has been rolling out trial sites for the digital currency. And by now, I think we have more than 1.5 million sites around the country.
Mm-hmm. Well, China is ready probably. It's really a matter of timing, whether this year or early next year. We don't know yet, but obviously digital economy is ready to be used, now being tested. Hong Hao, following your question, China is also the largest trading partner of about 130 countries and regions, and of course you have the Belt and Road Initiative. A lot of countries are getting connected. Is it possible, like the digital yuan, the digital RMB, gradually somehow will be introduced and being accepted by other economies?
I would say so. I think it offers great convenience, when doing imports and exports between countries, and also the Chinese currency is actually quite useful or quite widely accepted, by many of the countries along the Belt and Road program. So I would say that over time, the role of the digital yuan will gradually increase. But to challenge the hegemony of the US dollar, it will take some time. But I think people just need to be patient. But I believe that the euro, when it started, people were being very pessimistic about the futures of euro, and now euro is one of the major reserve currency. And I wouldn't be surprised to see, one day, sooner or later, the digital Chinese currency will become one of the more dominant reserve currency as well.
Well, Rebecca, recently some have said that, it is the time now for the central bank, basically for country to embrace central bank issued digital currency. So what is the situation in the U.S.? What's the people, the idea like when and how and will the U.S. introduce its own digital currency?
The U.S. is looking at central bank issued digital currency, and the U.S. also is looking at private crypto assets to see how they interact with the dollar and how they interact with official currency and where the risks are. We just heard from the main U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission regulator that they will be looking at something called stablecoins, which are designed specifically to build a bridge between volatile crypto assets and the U.S. dollar and other central bank-backed currencies. The advantage of a central bank doing the digital currency itself is it makes the backstop explicit, part of policy, and something that regulators can use their tools to control. If you have something attempting to link a private asset with a central banking backstop, you have risks to the system that may be tougher to rein in.
Well, Wang Dan, maybe that's the reason, if you look at the Chinese policy, obviously the government is cracking down on those cryptocurrency, including Bitcoin. But at the same time, some country, at least one government already basically make it official. They are going to use this cryptocurrency as their national currency. So what is the future of the digital currency?
Right now, it looks like that Bitcoin and a few other cryptocurrencies have their values, and more platforms are accepting Bitcoins as the ways of payment, which in itself will push up the equilibrium price for Bitcoin. But I don't think it is the right way to go for Bitcoin to go mainstream. Because in terms of regulation, it's basically the nightmare of all the central banks in the world. And right now, it's not just China. It's most economies in the rich world that are trying to crack down the Bitcoin because it's quite speculative, it's not inclusive, and for many people, it's like a gamble. It's not an investment. So in the end, I think Bitcoin and cryptocurrency will be part of the payment system in the future, but it will be more transparent and under the current regulatory framework.
So Hong Hao, very briefly, what kind of relationship we are going to see between different national official digital currencies? For example, there's digital US dollar, digital yuan, digital euro probably.
Well, I think initially the countries who develop the digital currency first and make it widely accepted by the trading partners will win. Will have the first mover advantage. But I think over time, in terms of payment structure, will just reflect whatever that is, currently right now in the system, in terms of percentage of total payment. So I think Chinese currency now is about less than 2% of total global payment. And I think once the digital currency accelerated from here, then the percentage probably will increase slightly from 2% to 3%.
Well, any prediction of the schedule for the official introduction of digital yuan, Hong Hao?
That would be very difficult to say, but we're sure that the direction is to launch it sooner rather than later.
Well, thanks to our guests, and that's it for today. Thanks for watching. See you next time.